It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when I first noticed the small leather-bound book lying on the ground near our driveway. The sun was warm on my back as I crouched to pick it up, its worn cover soft under my fingers. At first glance, it didn't seem like much. A simple diary, the kind you'd find in a stationery store. I looked around, half expecting someone to come rushing to claim it, but the street was empty. Our new neighbors had moved in just 2 weeks ago, a man named Colin and his wife Natalie. They seemed friendly enough, though Colin had a way of commanding attention wherever he went. He was tall, with an easy confidence and a quick smile. My wife Rachel had taken an immediate liking to both of them, chatting over coffee in their front yard whenever she got the chance. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. Rachel was outgoing, and making friends in the neighborhood was second nature to her. Curiosity got the better of me as I turned the diary over in my hands. The initials CW were embossed on the cover in gold, giving away its owner, Colin. I hesitated for a moment, then opened it. The first few pages were mundane, lists of tasks, meeting notes, and reminders. But as I flipped further, my curiosity quickly turned to unease. The entries shifted, becoming more personal. Colin wrote about his day-to-day life, but then, a few pages later, the tone changed. I scanned an entry dated just a month ago and felt my stomach drop. She's intoxicating. I never thought I'd find someone like her here. Rachel is magnetic, smart, beautiful, and completely irresistible. I know it's wrong, but I can't stop myself. Every moment with her feels like a stolen treasure. When we meet, it's like the rest of the world fades away. I froze, the words blurring as my heart began to race. Rachel, my wife's name. The diary fell to my lap, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. I stared at the words, willing them to change, to mean something else, but they didn't. I flipped to the next page, skimming the lines. The entries painted a vivid picture of their interactions, conversations in hushed tones, lingering glances when they thought no one was looking, stolen moments when I wasn't around. Colin's words were vivid, almost poetic, describing Rachel in ways that made my stomach churn. Today, she smiled at me in a way that told me everything I needed to know. She feels it too. I can see it in her eyes. This is dangerous, but I don't care. I've never felt anything like this before. I slammed the diary shut, my hands trembling. A part of me wanted to throw it away, to pretend I hadn't seen it, but another part of me, a darker, more desperate part, needed to know the truth. Was this real? Was Rachel capable of something like this? Or was Colin delusional, fabricating a fantasy in his head? I sat there for what felt like hours, the diary clutched in my hands as the warm afternoon sun turned to dusk. The edges of my world felt like they were fraying. Rachel had always been loyal, or so I thought. We'd had our ups and downs, sure, but this was something else entirely. When Rachel came home later that evening, I couldn't look at her the same way. She greeted me with her usual warmth, her smile lighting up the room as she set her bag down and kissed me on the cheek. But I couldn't stop thinking about Colin's words, the way he described her, the way he knew her. "Hey, you okay?" Rachel asked, noticing my silence. I nodded quickly, forcing a smile. "Yeah, just tired." She didn't seem convinced, but she let it go, disappearing into the kitchen to start dinner. I watched her from the living room, my mind racing. Was it all a lie? Everything we'd built, every memory we'd shared, was it all just a facade? That night, as Rachel slept beside me, I opened the diary again. The entries weren't just about their supposed affair. They also hinted at something deeper, something darker about Rachel's past. Colin's words were cryptic, but they left just enough breadcrumbs to lead my imagination down a dark path. She's hiding something. I'm sure of it. The way she talks about her past, it's guarded, like she's afraid of letting anyone in. But I can see through it. There's more to Rachel than she lets on. She's not who she pretends to be. I couldn't sleep. My mind spun with questions, each one more horrifying than the last. Who was my wife? Was she really the woman I thought I knew? Or had I been living with a stranger all these years? By the time dawn broke, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't confront her, not yet, not without more information. I needed answers, and the only way to get them was to keep reading. The diary wasn't just a window into an affair, It was a key to secrets I hadn't known existed, and I was about to unlock them all. The next morning I woke up early, my thoughts still tangled in the revelations from the diary. Rachel was already up, humming softly in the kitchen as the smell of coffee drifted through the house. She seemed so normal, as if nothing had changed. But for me, everything felt different. I couldn't stop seeing Colin's words in my mind, his vivid descriptions of her, their moments together, and the cryptic hints about her past. I grabbed the diary from where I'd hidden it under the couch cushions and flipped it open. I needed to know more, to figure out if this was some elaborate fantasy Colin had created or if there was truth to it. I skipped ahead to an entry from 2 weeks ago. She told me something today that caught me off guard. I don't think she meant to, but it slipped out. Something about her old life, before she met him. It's clear she's hiding something big, something she doesn't want anyone to know. But I'm not just anyone. I'll figure it out. My chest tightened as I read the words. What was Rachel hiding? She had always been open about her life, or at least I thought she had. We talked about everything, from childhood memories to past relationships, and nothing she'd said had ever raised a red flag. But now I wasn't so sure. I couldn't ask her directly without revealing that I had found the diary, so I decided to tread carefully. During breakfast, I tried to steer the conversation toward her past. Hey, Rach, I said casually as I sipped my coffee. Do you ever think about your life before we met? She looked up from her plate, a small smile playing on her lips. Sometimes. Why do you ask? I shrugged, feigning nonchalance. I don't know. Just curious. I feel like we've talked about everything, but maybe there are things I don't know. Surprises, you know. Her smile faltered slightly, and I noticed her hands tighten around her coffee mug. I don't know if there's much to tell. You know the important stuff. It was a simple response, but the way she said it made me uneasy. Her tone was too measured, too careful. I didn't press her, though. I couldn't afford to spook her before I had more information. Later that day, while Rachel was out running errands, I returned to the diary, desperate for answers. I flipped to the most recent entries, hoping to find something concrete. What I found was far worse than I'd imagined. She's becoming more comfortable around me, letting her guard down. Today, she told me about her first marriage. I don't think she wanted to, but I asked the right questions, and it just came out. She didn't say much, but I could tell it's a sore spot for her. She said it ended badly, but that's all she would say. There's more to the story. I can feel it. My mind reeled. Her first marriage? Rachel had never mentioned being married before me. She had always said I was her first and only husband. Why would she lie about something like that? And what did Colin mean by ended badly? The way he wrote about it sent a chill down my spine, as if there was something sinister lurking beneath the surface. I flipped to the next page, my hands trembling. I did some digging. It wasn't hard to find the records. Her first husband died in an accident, a house fire. At least that's what the official report says. But something about it doesn't add up. There were rumors in the neighborhood about foul play, but nothing was ever proven. She moved away shortly after, started fresh. And now here she is, living this perfect little life. But I wonder, how much of it is real? The room seemed to spin as I read the words. A house fire, rumors of foul play. My stomach churned as questions raced through my mind. Could Rachel have been involved? Was that why she had never told me about her first marriage? Was she hiding more than just an affair? When Rachel came home later, I could barely look at her. She smiled at me, asked about my day, but I could hear Colin's words echoing in my head. How much of it is real? I didn't know what to believe anymore. The woman I thought I knew, the life we had built together. It all felt like a fragile illusion, ready to shatter at any moment. That night, as Rachel slept beside me, I stayed up reading more of the diary. Colin's obsession with her was unnerving, but it was his relentless digging into her past that truly terrified me. He was piecing together a story I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. She's dangerous, one entry read. I don't think she even realizes it, but there's something in her that's different. It's like she's two people, the perfect wife everyone sees, and someone darker, someone who knows how to keep secrets. I wonder which one is the real Rachel. I stared at the words until they blurred. My chest felt tight, my breathing shallow. Colin might have been obsessed, but his observations rang too true to ignore. There was more to Rachel than I had ever imagined. And now I had to figure out who my wife really was before it was too late. The next morning, I woke with a sense of dread that had rooted itself deep in my chest. Rachel was already up, moving about the kitchen. I could hear the clatter of pots and pans as she prepared breakfast, the familiar sound oddly jarring now. She was humming again, a cheerful tune that made my stomach twist. How could she act so normal when everything around us felt like it was unraveling? I stayed in bed a little longer, staring at the ceiling and replaying the words from Colin's diary. Her first husband died in an accident, a house fire. I couldn't get the phrase out of my head. It hung there, heavy and unresolved. The Rachel I thought I knew had never mentioned anything about a first husband, let alone his tragic death. Eventually, I got up and made my way to the kitchen. Rachel turned to me with a bright smile, holding a steaming mug of coffee. "Morning," she said, her voice light. "You slept in?" "Yeah," I said, taking the mug and forcing a small smile. "Needed the rest." She tilted her head, studying me for a moment. "You've seemed a little off the past couple of days. Is everything okay?" I nodded quickly, not trusting myself to speak. "Just work stress," I lied. "It's nothing." She accepted the answer but looked unconvinced. "Well, let me know if there's anything I can do." Her kindness felt like a cruel irony. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but I couldn't. Not yet. I didn't have enough information, and the thought of accusing her without proof felt reckless. I needed more time to figure out what was real and what wasn't. Later that day, I decided to follow up on what I had read in Colin's diary. If her first marriage had ended in tragedy, there had to be records. I sat at my computer, heart pounding as I typed her maiden name into a search engine. My hands trembled as I clicked through articles, obituaries, and public records. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. There it was, an article from nearly a decade ago. Local man dies in house fire, cause remains unknown. The photo accompanying the article showed a young Rachel, standing outside a burned-down house, her face pale and tear-streaked. The article described the fire as suspicious, but noted that no charges had ever been filed. It also mentioned that Rachel had moved away shortly after the tragedy, leaving behind friends and neighbors who had speculated about her involvement. I leaned back in my chair, the words blurring on the screen. This was real. Colin hadn't been lying. Rachel had been married before, and her husband had died under mysterious circumstances. Why hadn't she told me? What was she hiding? The questions gnawed at me as the day went on. When Rachel suggested we go for a walk that evening, I agreed, hoping the fresh air would clear my head. We strolled through the neighborhood, making small talk, but I could barely focus. Every word she said felt like part of a carefully constructed facade, designed to keep me from seeing the truth. At one point, we passed Colin's house. The lights were on, and I could see him through the window, sitting at a desk, scribbling in what I assumed was his diary. My stomach churned at the sight. I wondered if he knew I had it, if he suspected that I had been reading his innermost thoughts about my wife. "You've been spending a lot of time with Colin," I said casually, testing the waters. Rachel glanced at me, her expression unreadable. "Not really, just a few chats here and there." "Why?" "No reason," I said quickly. "Just curious." She didn't respond, but I noticed the way her hand tightened around the strap of her purse. It was a small gesture, almost imperceptible, but it spoke volumes. She was hiding something. That night after Rachel went to bed, I returned to the diary. I felt like a man possessed, unable to stop myself from reading, even though every entry made my stomach churn. Colin's words were becoming more unsettling, more pointed. "I think she's on to me," one entry read. "She's been asking me questions, trying to steer the conversation away from her past. But I know what she's doing. She's trying to keep me in the dark. But it's too late. I know too much now." I flipped the page, my hands trembling. I'm starting to think she's dangerous, not just because of what happened to her first husband, but because of the way she hides it. It's almost like she believes her own lies, like she's convinced herself that none of it happened. But I can see through her. She's not who she pretends to be. The words sent a chill down my spine. Was Colin paranoid, or was there truth to what he was saying? I didn't know what to believe anymore. But one thing was clear. I couldn't ignore this any longer. I had to confront Rachel. I had to know the truth. But as I closed the diary and stared at her sleeping figure in the bed, a new fear crept into my mind. What if Colin was right? What if Rachel wasn't just hiding her past, but actively trying to bury it? The next morning, I sat across from Rachel at the breakfast table, the diary burning a metaphorical hole in the drawer where I had hidden it. She was scrolling through her phone, sipping her coffee with the casual ease of someone whose life was perfectly normal. Meanwhile, my mind was a storm of questions and accusations. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to start peeling back the layers, no matter the risk. Rach, I began, keeping my tone as neutral as possible. Do you ever think about your old life? Like before we met? She looked up, her brow furrowing slightly. You asked me something like that the other day. Why? I shrugged, feigning nonchalance. Just curious. You don't talk about it much. She hesitated, her fingers tightening around her coffee mug. There's not much to talk about. It was a long time ago. Her answer was so carefully measured that it set off alarms in my mind. There's not much to talk about. Except there was. An entire marriage, a husband who died, and a cloud of suspicion that had followed her ever since. I wanted to push her, to demand answers, but I knew I had to be careful. If I came on too strong, she'd shut down completely, and I couldn't afford that. Later that day, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I couldn't confront her directly without more information, but there was another option. Colin. He had been digging into Rachel's past, and while I didn't trust him, I needed to know what else he had uncovered. I waited until the evening, when Rachel left to meet a friend for dinner. As soon as her car disappeared down the street, I grabbed the diary and walked over to Colin's house. My heart was pounding as I rang the doorbell, the leather-bound book clutched tightly in my hand. Colin opened the door, his expression shifting from surprise to curiosity. David, he said smoothly, leaning against the doorframe, what brings you here? I held up the diary. This. You left it by our driveway. For a moment his expression faltered. His eyes darted to the book, then back to me, and I could see the gears turning in his mind. Ah, he said, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. I was wondering where that went. I've read it, I said bluntly, cutting through any pretense. All of it. The smirk disappeared, replaced by something colder. He stepped aside, motioning for me to come in. I think we need to talk. The inside of Colin's house was neat and modern, but it felt sterile, like it lacked the warmth of a home. He led me to the living room, gesturing for me to sit on the couch. I didn't. I stood near the window, the diary still clutched in my hand, my pulse racing. You've been writing about my wife, I said, my voice sharp. About her past. About whatever you think is going on between you two. Colin crossed his arms, leaning against the wall with an air of nonchalance. And I need to know what's real, I said, my voice rising. Is this all in your head, or is there something I should actually be worried about? Colin chuckled softly, shaking his head. Oh, David, you're asking the wrong question. What's that supposed to mean? It means, he said, stepping closer, that the real question isn't whether you should be worried about me. It's whether you should be worried about her. My stomach twisted. What are you talking about? You've read the diary, Colin said, his voice low and deliberate. You know what I've uncovered. Your wife isn't who she says she is. She's hiding things, big things. And the more I learn, the more dangerous she seems. Dangerous, I repeated, my voice shaking. What are you trying to say? Colin leaned in, his eyes locked on mine. I'm saying your wife isn't just hiding her past. She's rewriting it, and people who get too close to the truth tend to regret it. His words sent a chill down my spine. I wanted to dismiss him as a paranoid narcissist, someone who had become obsessed with Rachel and was projecting his fantasies onto her. But the diary, the records of her first husband's death, and Rachel's own guarded behavior all painted a different picture. You're insane, I said, though my voice lacked conviction. Colin smiled. Am I? Or are you just afraid of what you might find if you dig a little deeper? I didn't respond. I turned and walked out of the house, the diary clutched tightly in my hand. As I stepped into the cool night air, I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. Colin's words were ringing in my ears, and for the first time, I wondered if he might be right. When I got home, Rachel was already back, sitting on the couch with a glass of wine. She looked up as I entered, her smile faltering when she saw the tension on my face. "Everything okay?" she asked. I forced a nod, my mind racing. "Yeah, just went for a walk." She didn't press further, but I could feel her watching me as I headed to the bedroom. That night, as I lay beside her, I couldn't sleep. My mind was spinning with Colin's words, with the entries in the diary, with the lingering question that I couldn't escape. Who is my wife? And for the first time, I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. The next morning, the weight of Colin's words clung to me like a storm cloud. Your wife isn't just hiding her past, she's rewriting it. The accusation played on a loop in my mind, refusing to let me rest. Rachel moved through the house with her usual cheerfulness, but now every smile, every glance, felt like a carefully crafted performance. Was she truly capable of what Colin suggested? Or was he manipulating me into seeing something that wasn't there? Rachel kissed me on the cheek as she left for the day. "See you tonight," she said with a bright smile. I nodded, unable to summon the energy to respond. As soon as the door closed behind her, I grabbed my laptop and dove into the rabbit hole of her past. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I knew I couldn't stop until I found it. My search started with the fire that had claimed her first husband's life. The local newspaper archives provided more details than I'd expected. The house had burned to the ground in the middle of the night, the fire consuming everything before firefighters could arrive. The husband, Daniel Foster, had been found in the wreckage. The article noted that Rachel had escaped the blaze unharmed, but there were whispers of suspicion. I scrolled further, finding an older article from when the couple had first moved into the neighborhood. It was a puff piece about their new home, accompanied by a photo of the smiling couple. My stomach clenched as I stared at Rachel's face. She looked happy, carefree, but something about her eyes unnerved me. Even in that moment of joy, there was a flicker of something else. Fear? Guilt? I couldn't tell. I dug deeper, pulling up court records and public documents. There had been no charges filed against Rachel after the fire, but there was a transcript from an inquest. Neighbors had testified about arguments between her and Daniel in the weeks leading up to his death. One described hearing shouting late at night, another mentioned seeing bruises on Daniel's arms. Rachel had denied everything, and the coroner ultimately ruled the fire accidental. I leaned back in my chair, my heart pounding. The pieces weren't fitting together, and yet they felt connected by an invisible thread. Rachel had been married before, her husband had died under suspicious circumstances, and now Colin was convinced she was hiding more. What was the truth? And did I even want to know? When Rachel came home that evening, I struggled to act normal. She greeted me with her usual warmth, but I could feel her eyes lingering on me, as if she sensed something had shifted. "You've been quiet lately," she said as we sat down to dinner. "Is everything okay?" I forced a smile. "Just work stuff," I lied. "It's been a busy week." She nodded, but her expression remained wary. For the first time, I wondered if she was watching me as closely as I was watching her. That night, I opened Colin's diary again. I needed to know more, even if it meant unraveling the last threads of trust I had in my wife. One entry, dated just days before I found the diary, caught my attention. I confronted her today, asked her about Daniel. She denied everything, of course, but I could see it in her eyes. The fear, the guilt. She knows I'm getting too close. She knows I won't stop. I stared at the page, my heart racing. Colin had confronted Rachel. She hadn't mentioned anything about it. I flipped to the next entry, my hands trembling. "She's dangerous. I see that now." The way she looked at me, it was like she was deciding whether to tell me the truth or make me disappear. I can't trust her. I don't think anyone can. But I'm too far in now. I have to see this through. A chill ran down my spine. Colin's paranoia was unnerving, but his words felt too precise to dismiss entirely. Was Rachel truly dangerous? Or was Colin projecting his own obsession onto her? I didn't know who to believe anymore. The next day, I decided to test her. When she got home from work, I brought up the topic of Colin casually, watching her reaction closely. Colin's been interesting, hasn't he? I said, pouring myself a drink. Rachel froze for a split second, barely perceptible, before forcing a smile. What do you mean? I don't know, I said, taking a sip. He just seems intense, like he's always watching people. She laughed nervously. Yeah, he's a little strange, but he's harmless. Her response felt rehearsed, like she'd been waiting for me to bring him up. I decided to push further. He ever ask you about your past? Rachel's hand tightened around her glass, and for the first time I saw a flicker of something behind her eyes. Panic? Anger? Why would he? She asked, her tone sharper than I'd expected. No reason, I said quickly, trying to backtrack. Just curious. She didn't respond, but I could see the tension in her body, the way she avoided meeting my gaze. That night, as she lay beside me, I knew one thing for certain. She was hiding something, and whatever it was bigger than I had imagined. The truth felt closer than ever, but I also knew that uncovering it might destroy everything. The question was, did I have the courage to keep going? The house was suffocatingly quiet that night. Rachel lay next to me in bed, her breathing steady and calm, as if nothing had changed. But for me, sleep was impossible. The pieces of the puzzle were scattered in my mind, fragments of truths and half-truths that didn't quite fit together. Colin's diary, Rachel's guarded answers, the fire. All of it pointed to a deeper story, one I wasn't sure I wanted to uncover, but now felt I had no choice. By morning, my resolve had hardened. I couldn't keep living in the dark, unable to distinguish lies from reality. I had to confront her. Over breakfast, I set down my mug and looked at Rachel, her face framed by the soft light filtering through the kitchen window. For a moment, I hesitated. This was the woman I had loved, the woman I had built a life with. But was she also someone I didn't truly know? Rach, I began, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. She looked up from her plate, her brow furrowing. Of course. What is it? I took a deep breath, the words catching in my throat. Why didn't you ever tell me about your first husband? Her reaction was immediate, her face drained of color, her fork clattering against her plate. For a moment, she just stared at me, her eyes wide and unblinking. What are you talking about? She finally managed, her voice shaky. You know what I'm talking about, I said, leaning forward. Daniel, the fire, the inquest, all of it. Why did you keep that from me? Her lips parted, but no words came out. She looked like a cornered animal, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. David, I didn't think it mattered. It was so long ago. It doesn't matter? I said, my voice rising despite myself. Your husband died under suspicious circumstances and you don't think it matters? Do you have any idea what it's like to find out something like this from someone else? Her eyes snapped to mine. From someone else? What are you talking about? Colin, I said, watching her reaction closely. He's been digging into your past. He knows everything, Rachel, and now I do too. Her face twisted into something I couldn't quite read. Fear, anger, desperation all at once. Colin, she said, almost spitting his name. Of course, that man has been obsessed with me since the day we met. Obsessed? I repeated, my voice heavy with disbelief. Rachel, you need to stop deflecting and tell me the truth. What happened with Daniel? And what's really going on between you and Colin? She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Nothing is going on between me and Colin, she said sharply. He's been stalking me, David. He's been prying into my life, trying to find dirt on me. I didn't say anything because I didn't want to give him the satisfaction. I stared at her, trying to determine if she was lying. And Daniel, was he prying into your life too? Her face crumpled at the mention of his name. She sank back into her chair, burying her face in her hands. It wasn't supposed to happen, she whispered, her voice trembling. The fire, it was an accident. I tried to save him, but I couldn't. And then the rumors started and people turned on me. I had to leave, David. I had to start over. An accident? I said, my voice laced with doubt. Do you expect me to believe that? Rachel looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. Yes, because it's the truth. I love Daniel. But our marriage was falling apart. We argued all the time, and the night of the fire was no different. But I didn't kill him, David. I swear her words sounded sincere. But the doubt lingered. Colin's diary had painted a very different picture of Rachel, one of manipulation, secrets, and danger. But as I stared at her, broken and vulnerable, I realized something important. I didn't know who to believe. Colin with his obsession and paranoia, or Rachel, whose past was riddled with shadows, but who had always been the woman I loved. "What about Colin?" I asked, my voice softer now. "Why does he think you're dangerous?" Rachel shook her head. "Because he's unstable. He's been obsessed with me since we moved here. He's tried to corner me, ask me questions about my past, accuse me of things I didn't do. I didn't tell you because I thought I could handle it, but now I see I should have." Her explanation felt plausible, but something still didn't sit right. "If he's unstable, why didn't you come to me sooner? Why let him get this close?" "I was scared," she said, her voice cracking. "Scared of what you'd think if you knew everything. Scared of losing you." The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging heavily between us. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to forgive her. But could I? That evening, I returned the diary to Colin, leaving it on his doorstep without a word. As I walked away, I felt a strange sense of relief. The book had been a poison, feeding my doubts and fears. But without it, I was left with one simple truth. I had to decide who to trust. When I got home, Rachel was waiting for me. She looked up as I entered, her expression unreadable. "Are you leaving?" she asked, her voice barely audible. I stared at her for a long moment, my heart heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. "No," I said finally. "But things have to change, Rachel. No more secrets." She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "No more secrets." As we stood there in the quiet of our home, I realized that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The shadows of Rachel's past would linger, and the cracks in our relationship wouldn't heal overnight. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. We weren't whole, but we weren't broken beyond repair. And for now, that was enough.